welcome to Conversations with Life, Season 3, Episode 7. Today, we are continuing with our theme of archetypes, and we're going to go into some of the common archetypes that people are using in everyday life, such as different pantheons, the zodiac, things that we might be familiar with from history class in school or from our, reading our daily horoscope in the newspaper, and what we can do with those and some of the common threads that are there between these different, myths, if you will. So, we're excited to be here, and go ahead, Steve.
This one always gets me. Like Zodiac always gets me. There's that common meme that the boy's like, "Hey mom, what's my birth date?" And she's like, "Stay away from that girl."
That's a great meme, because it's like part of what we're going to talk to today is like, how do you not get played by this?
How do you not get played by it? And we all know those people who are so into any particular way of thinking about archetype or way of thinking about energy or way of thinking about consciousness that they're impossible, right? Like they're so into this world of zodiac. And I love people who are, by the way, people who are into it so much that they know everything and they can look at your chart and they'll like tell you everything about you. And I love to sit with an astrologer that's really knowledgeable and kind of get that kind of feedback. And I've had that experience, enough to be like, okay, that's valid. But also I've had the experience with people enough who they think that these patterns are fate to the point where it's unhealthy. And also they get pretty wacky about it. They lose perspective of a wider psychological or grounded approach. And they get so far into the patterns that they lose their humanity somewhere along the way. So
yeah, I think that loss of humanity is an important thing to kind of be watching out for, because like you said it in the meme, like the reason that mom was telling her son to stay away from somebody is that girl's going to read his horoscope and try to control him with it.
Yes, like you're a this and that, so therefore you should do this and that.
Exactly.
And if you don't, you should feel bad about yourself. And now I have power.
Yes, exactly.
And the way Robert Moore says it is that we came here to be human, not to be an archetype. And if we were going to be archetypal, we would have gone to a different realm that's not so fleshy and, where we don't have to eat and shit and, do all the human things. Do archetypes shit? And other questions,
It's like they do, but it's the perfect shit.
It's the archetype.
It's exactly the right
It's the
shit.
poop emoji every time.
Or it's like the wombat cube. It's just perfect.
That's the name of this episode. Do archetype shit?
Yeah.
And other questions. So, I had this experience. I use these things sometimes when I coach, and I'm looking for people's patterns. One of the things that I like to say is that there are no problems. There are no problems, only patterns. And when you kind of release things from being a problem and move into the pattern of things, now you can make some sense and also give yourself some grace and compassion for patterns that you never chose, and these patterns play out. Energy is connected. Your soul is connected to every damn thing in the universe. It ever has been. Every idea, every conceptual or non-conceptual thing you're connected to. We have a relationship to, and that's one of the definitions of soul that I really like. And so, to think that the planets or the sun or, these different energies that exist in the earth and around us, both physically and not physically, have effect on you is not a far-fetched idea. So, I had a friend once who I was coaching, and I used this book by Jan Spiller. It's called the Soul Astrology, and it's a North Node book. And she says, this famous astrologer, writes lots of books, this is her key. Like, if she wants to read someone, get their North Node. Now, North Node in astrology is a certain placement of a planet in the northernmost part of your chart, right? And so you'll be able to see what that north node is. And so, my friend, I'm coaching him, and I read him this thing about himself, and it like reads his soul, like things he's never talked about, things he's never like wanted to reveal to anybody. And his response to me reading him this chapter, or reading him a piece of this North Node, was that he was so angry.
How dare you?
How dare you? And then, what he was really angry about was that I got this information just by catching his birth date.
Yeah. I mean, there's like, we as people like to pretend we have control, and really we don't. But like one of the things we think we have control over is what information we give about ourselves, right? I am sacred to myself, and I get to share things. And so I've had the feeling of being really pissed off when I'm overseen, where I'm like, fuck you, man. How dare you see the things I'm supposed to be keeping in the dark? And what do you mean you can get that because I was born on some random ass day that so were 100 million other people?
In a way, we're a special and unique snowflake, but also that snowflake forms on very predictable patterns of the folding of energy, the way that energy produces itself in the world. One of the funny things you can see is that everything runs on Fibonacci. Everything, you look at the natural world, every little thing is like ordered, falls in a pattern. Proteins fold in a pattern that we still can't understand, right? Like there's like all sorts of complexity to this. And so, but we think that doesn't happen emotionally or socially or whatever,
Well, it's that thing too of like, everyone's an individual and everyone's unique. And it's like, yeah, but you can be unique by like 0.001% of yourself. Like you could have two things that are like, nothing is actually truly identical.
Right.
Because there's that standard deviation of difference. And so it's like, what does it mean to be like, I'm a unique individual? It means I've never met anyone exactly like me. But I get all the time, oh, you remind me of so-and-so. You have the same energy as so-and-so. You're very similar to this person. And I'm like, yeah, we all experience everything a little bit differently, but we're all experiencing really similar stuff in the same system. Like if you think of Earth as like, Earth is an open system, I guess, technically, according to engineering, right? Like it receives energy from the outside of itself, right? The sun and the motion and the movement is all external forces. So we are technically an open system, Earth, right? But, we're dealing with the same system. Everyone on Earth is still everyone on Earth. And so it's like there's only so much variation that can happen on Earth. And I think that's the explanation for all the patterns. Like I look at that and I go, yeah, well, if it works, why wouldn't everything be based on this magical little Fibonacci pattern? Like, why would nature be like, but actually, fuck it, chaos. Like, I don't, nature wants to survive. We all want to survive. So we fall into patterns because they're comfortable, because there are resources for dealing with patterns, because there's information, because we can understand patterns. It makes sense to me.
Well, yeah, patterns are beautiful and we come in and out of them. So it's interesting to think that we move from pattern to pattern, right? So there's a dissolution and there's reforming. So this is the whole of human life. We die to ourselves all the time, and so that we can reform, right? And we will always approach that pattern a little bit differently, but it will always be somewhat predictable. So in all of human being, in every process I've seen, every initiation process, every growth container, every thing, there's a pattern, hero's journey. We went through that one, right? Yeah. There's this thing, but the way that I do that is going to be my own, but I can expect that there's these phases, right? And there's these, often if I can see it, if I can get that pattern, I can kind of see what's coming so that I can helpfully anticipate it. The problem is I could see it and I could dread it, or I could refuse it, or I could, or I could try to do it like somebody else and somebody else's expectations and not really get the benefit, So it's really interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting to have people try to make predictions for us. Like you were saying, Keith, there's a sacredness to our individuality that feels put upon when somebody tries to see a pattern and call it and then make predictions on it. like I know personally I have an extreme amount of, like, I take that on as a challenge. Like, you think you know what I'm going to do? I remember my mother-in-law, who was like, ahead of the game for like the whole energy thing. Like, she was really into it from a pretty early time in her life, and all the kinds of energy medicine, spent time studying in China and Japan, and beautiful practitioner, but on a personality level, really challenging to work with, because that's what would make her feel important, is making accurate predictions.
Right.
And so she told me when I was pregnant one time that she had tested and she knew that I was only going to have 2 girls. And so when I went and got my ultrasound for my 6th baby and it was a girl, it was like, yeah.
So how many kids would you have if she had not made that prediction?
Or if that hadn't been a girl, I would have just kept going until I had a girl.
It's like, I wonder if you would have had like 3 kids and been like, I'm good. Like, you know.
I probably would have.
Well, she did have 2 boys at the end, so you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did have 5 boys, but yeah, it was just that's just a really strong example of in my life where somebody's like, or I remember my dad seeing me write like, I love Robert Schroeder on my notebook for junior high, you know, as he's driving me to school, and he's like, you know, teenagers can get really like wrapped up in this romance thing, but like, it's never gonna last. And a part of me was like, I'm finding a boyfriend right now and staying with him for the rest of my life.
That challenge.
Because it kind of feels dismissive of where you are.
Of your experience. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to be said of like, we do this all the time as parents too. You know, oh, you don't understand yet. You know, you're a teenager, you don't know, or you're a kid or whatever it is. And we're right for a lot of it. Like it's accurate that the love that they feel as a teenager, if you want to quantifiably pour it into a cup, is not as full as the love that they might experience as adults, right? If they're going to experience love in both of those time periods. But I always look at it and go, but what's the size of their cup, right? So, you know, we look at a teenager and we're like, oh yeah, you've got like, you know, this much love. Like, you know, if you got 50 mils of love, that's nothing compared to the gallons you'll feel in eternal marriage or some bullshit the church says, right? But it's like, that's a fucking lot if you have a 55 mil cup.
Right. If their cup's like overflowing.
Yeah, you know? Or a 40 mil cup. Exactly. So it's funny because we do this because it makes us feel safe and in control.
Yeah.
As a parent, it makes me feel in control to be able to say to my teenage kid, hey, this romance thing, it's just like driving a car. The first time you got behind the wheel and you hit the gas, you didn't know how sensitive it was going to be. Stop cuddling your boyfriend so intensely you're hitting the gas too hard, right? And be like, I can tell you exactly what's happening. I can even wrap it up in a pretty little analogy for you. Stop driving a sports car like it's a station wagon. Chill out, right? You know, and I could do that. And then but it gives me control. It gives me power. It gives me understanding. Patterns make me feel safe and comfortable. It's what they do for all of us. So the same thing happens with these astrology ones and whatever, right? The girl that's obsessed with astrology just needs to know that someone's not going to hurt her again. And she's looking to find the perfect compatible person to not have the same problem happen in the past or the thing that she fears or whatever it is, or he, right? And to make sense of their reality. And that makes us feel safe. And I'm like, we are one little tiny speck that's like spinning at like, what is it, like 1,000 miles an hour? And then that's spinning at like 100,000 miles an hour around the sun, and at like 100,000 miles more. Like, we are rocketing through the universe at breakneck speeds, and we're like, but this, Aquarius, that will define how my life goes. That is the thing I can hold on to.
But it's strangely accurate. And so it underlies how we approach life, right? So to Jung, for instance, what I love about his thing is that his principal archetype, although he was probably maybe the seer of archetypes as a psychological function in our age, the major archetype is self. Yourself, what you consider your being is an archetype.
Right.
And so when what we do is and the idea is we need to balance that self with all the other archetypes. And so, that's kind of the way life is. We meet it with just our experience, what we are, how we are, what we can find out about ourselves, and hold that container really carefully. Mm-hmm. And then we see from there how those other things affect us, but we don't leave this. If you leave yourself, those things will fuck you up. They'll take you out. Yeah. And that's the truth of romance, right? Like you say, if I am willing to abandon myself to feel loved, romance will never be a thing that I should,
it'll mess me up. It'll wreck me.
It'll be fucked up your whole life. And you see people that happens.
I
maybe it's all. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I liken it to like it's almost like a spacewalk. You know what I mean? Like you're tethered to like that little space station, or that ship is yourself, right? And so if you stay tethered, you stay strong. You can go on a spacewalk. That'll be cool. You can go and see some stars. You can go see some cool shit. But the second you are unbuckled from your spaceship, you're fucked. Like, it doesn't matter what else happens to you.
Right.
And good luck finding it again. Like, if you get far enough into the archetypes, I feel like, and this is a trap that I got very close to being into, right? And like really was in for a long time. If you get too far out away from your central ship, yourself, good luck finding your little spaceship in the vast universe of where we are, right? Like, there's so many archetypes. And the reason I think, and this is just from, my training as an acolyte of this, right? When I think of the self as an archetype, I think of it as because, like, it's an archetype because I cannot fully define every single element of me. I cannot, so I have to make an archetype that is myself. It's almost like I'm making a little doll that is Keith. And I'm like, these are the things that make me me. I'm missing a crap ton of stuff that I can't even identify as part of who I am. And so then the idea of trying to come back to exactly who I am, like, you never will and you never should, right? When you go and explore an archetype and you come back, part of you has changed, right?
Yeah.
You've like Reed Richards yourself and you've hit some solar radiation and now you can be extra stretchy, right? But you still want to come back to somewhat close to who you are. You want to be able to recognize yourself again. And so I look at the self as the archetype as, this is my what do you call it? My voodoo doll, my what is the word? My totem, I guess, of who
avatar?
I am. My avatar, yeah. And it's like, it's an anchor point, but it should never be the goal, the end.
Yeah, what the image that comes to mind is a cell membrane, and Bruce Lipton, Biology Belief, highly recommend his work. He talks about how the nucleus of the cell is actually the gonads. We've been calling it the brain, and
well, sometimes it's the same thing.
The actual brain or the actual intelligence of the cell lies in the membrane because it knows what to let in and what to let out. Like all the energies approaching it, it changes. And what it lets in and what it lets out is really it alters in the genes. Right. So we think the genes are the master, but actually maybe the membrane is more of that intelligence, and it affects and chooses what can be let in and let out for the health of the cell. And if that membrane is functioning correctly, then the cell works really well. And if it doesn't, then, it doesn't. That gets back to boundaries and so forth. But really, like, how it is, we interact with energies all around us, right? Yeah. So our like all the emphasis on group and whatever is facilitated because I think we're moving into a we age. We're moving from a me age to a we age in one of the models. And all of that is facilitated by us being ourselves, And so like this experience is sacred. And if I don't leave myself, I'll never see myself. If I'm never able to consider anything else, I'm never going to be here. I'm never going to see myself really well. So I think one of the things that archetypes lets us do is get out of ourselves productively, unless we get swept away in it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I've heard one person describe it as it takes you from one of 8 billion to, if you're using the zodiac, one of 12.
Yeah.
And there's value in that of really being like, okay, like this is a way that we could categorize humanity, and there are things I can learn in that Aries, right?
Yeah.
And there are a couple different ways that I see people responding to archetype, or I would even say reacting to it, that aren't helpful. And one of them is complete dismissal. Like, oh, this doesn't affect me, or making fun of people who consult astrology, or, saying when there's a certain cosmological event that legitimately and measurably a different kind of energy is moving on the planet, people saying like, oh, that has no effect on me, as if you could stand, in a flood and say, this flood isn't going to affect me. So that's one way that I feel like people miss out on working with these energies, is by totally dismissing them and pretending that they're like bigger or better than the people who consult astrology, right?
I mean, I think it's hilarious. Sorry. We assume, right? We take for granted that the moon can literally affect the movements of like billions of gallons of water on a daily basis. Yeah, of course it can. It can move the tides, right?
Yeah.
But not me.
Right.
Yeah.
Like that's crazy.
Like, even though your body's made of water and it's way
Right.
less water for the moon to move.
Right. I mean, even if you think like magnetically, right? Like, because the way the moon, right, moves the water is like the magnetic currents and the gravitational pull and all that kind of crap, right? Whatever the energy is labeled as. And it's like, we know that we are affected by electromagnetic currents and things like that. Now, I'm not going to go all like, oh, I've got, like, the 5G is going to infect my brain and I need to go and live on the reservation with no Wi-Fi or anything. But I can find a place in between. I'm not affected by anything around me, and I am completely subjugated by the bandwidth of 5G. And I can say, yeah, there is some effect. And I think teachers and mothers and doctors get a really good understanding of this, because everybody was freaking the fuck out last week when it was like, or what is it Halloween? It's the supermoon, but like fall break, like just right after we had like a full moon, it was a super moon, it was like a 13th, all this shit. And I'm like, I don't know if anybody else out there is an educator, but being at a school, especially a high school on a full moon, like, don't tell me that shit doesn't affect you.
Yeah,
crime
same
rates,
with midwives. Yeah. Like, more births happen on a full moon.
Crime rate goes up, more murders, all sorts of different things.
So it's a matter of being like, okay, yes, there is an effect. And like, you can't control an effect unless you acknowledge its existence, right? Like, I can't stand against the current if I don't acknowledge the current is there, because I won't be prepared for when it takes my legs out.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? Thinking about the memetics, this idea of memetics, in which I am a complete system within a complete system within a complete system.
But
right?
not any of those are closed systems.
They're none of them closed systems, right? So all of them affecting each other, but all of them there's universes within universes within universes in the memetic idea, right? Because I act as an independent thing that has my own life and will. And each of my cells can also act as an independent thing that has its own sort of will, and if that happens in some disharmonious way, and there's,
cancer's a great example.
Then there's a problem.
Cancer is a great example of that, right? Like, cancer is your cells literally killing each other and themselves, like, and then your body can go into overdrive and kill your good stuff. Like, the systems get out of whack and out of alignment all the time. So if we can give medicine to ourselves, then why aren't we giving medicine to ourself? We are so far, like, not even close to what we said we were going to talk about today that I kind of love it.
Well, actually, we're exactly on it, because we were going to talk about these energies impact us. And what do we do with it?
So, like, what are these energies? So I guess really we've done a really prolonged introduction.
So you were going to make another point. So you were saying how one of the things is to ignore them.
Right. And the other thing is to be completely victimized by them. And that's where you become untethered. You become fate. And so then it's like, oh my God, I have to take work off today because there's going to be a full moon or whatever.
Venus is rising in retrograde.
Because I'm in,
shit.
yes.
And honestly, like,
maybe
taking work off occasionally for those kinds of events would be honoring, but it's more of like, okay, there's this thing that's going to affect me.
Right.
how do I be in right relationship with it? How do I meet that with my self energy instead of like getting swept away from it or completely rejecting it? You develop a relationship with it.
How do I channel that?
And I think, you know, in that box of being victimized is having somebody read your astrology and then you identify with everything they said. And you're like, oh, I can't do that. I'm an Aries.
To the point where you're giving up your thing. And this gets to the larger point of all the archetypes, is that you start with a reference to energy. There was a certain pattern of energy when you were born, and that affects you. I have no doubt about that. I really like the book called Inner Sky. I'm trying to remember the author, but he takes it from he takes astrology from an evolutionary psychology perspective. And he's like, at this particular time, just like in that book, Outliers, where if you were born a certain time of the year, you were going to be a good hockey player.
Stephen
Forrest.
Forrest.
Yeah.
What's that?
Stephen Forrest.
Stephen Forrest in the Inner Sky. But, you know, this one where if you were born in the early year, you were a bigger kid at this age. And so you were more likely to be a professional hockey player, right?
Right.
So it's kind of like this kind of, this Outliers kind of thing. There was a particular reference in the energy of the whole of our known universe that you were born in. Now, but that's your reference point. That's just your entry to energy. You're really all of them. Just like you are all of the pantheons. That you're just like you aren't just a masculine or you aren't just a feminine. You have all of these energies, but your reference to energy, you got to integrate testosterone first. Now, life does this funny thing where you get middle age and your testosterone goes down and your estrogen becomes relatively higher. And you go, oh, shit, feelings.
Yeah.
You know, like we are given the opportunity through a normal lifespan to experience all of those energies. But we have a reference, and that reference is important. But all of those energies are equally important. Like if I say I'm a Capricorn, I'm a shitty Capricorn, by the way. Not good at this Capricorn thing, except for my stubbornness and a few other things. But like Capricorns are supposed to be super driven and usually rich. You know, it's like the thing. Like I've done that. I mean, I've always had the drive, but I've never done it. Like there's so many other things. I'm also
your neurodivergence.
I'm also a Cuspy Aquarius. So.
ADHD cancels out your...
Right, it does. It really does. It's like, I'm a shitty, as I said, I'm a shitty Capricorn. But like, you know, I can see those patterns and I can read my chart. And, you know, for instance, the first time I sat with an astrologer, you know what they told me? You're going to be a spiritual teacher.
Okay.
This is before I even had...
Yikes.
I had that thought. Like, they're just like, principally, your goal, your main role here probably is to be some kind of teacher, and probably you're going to be giving people spiritual guidance. That's probably your role. And I was like, okay, right? And now I didn't use that as a fate, you know. I was already headed that direction, you know. I was always headed into trauma healing and so forth. So that was really interesting to me, you know.
But if you're now open to that, you're going to be watching for things, for ways that your individual personality can manifest into that.
Right.
See, okay, so this is the skeptic in me, right? And I don't usually come at this with the skeptic vibe, but this is one of those things that I really struggle with. Someone I love very much recently got their patriarchal blessing.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought this in because I was just about to talk about patriarchal blessings.
Now, for those of you who are not LDS out there, right, Mormons or whatever, a patriarchal blessing is a blessing that is given to a teenager usually a teenager, but at a person at a certain point in their life when they need guidance. And it's supposed to be a blessing, but also a foretelling, right? And it's very vague. It's not given a lot of there's not a lot of literature about what it actually is, but it's supposed to be a blessing from God that gives you guidance. Okay. So, now I got mine at a weird time. I was a convert, right? So I was in my 20s getting my patriarchal blessing. I was also in my Masters of Teaching program, right? And I was with my fiance at the time. We weren't married yet. And she took me to go get it. And, the guy talked to me for a bit, and then he gave me this blessing that was, you know, you are of the tribe of, is it not, what is it?
Ephraim, probably?
No, and the other one.
Manasseh?
Yeah, Manasseh, right? That was like, you're going to be a great teacher and all this stuff. And I was like, oh my God, I'm in a Master's of Teaching program. How did he know that? And I'm like, well, I probably said it in the conversation we just had. But like, at the time I was all swept up in the mysticism of it and the religious validation of it. And, you're talking about like how I'm going to be a bishop and all those things. I'll tell you right now, that is never going to be a thing. I'm never going to be a bishop in the LDS church, right? However,
That'd be a good one.
when I received that blessing, right? I was all in on teaching. Like it drove me forward. It gave me power. It gave me energy. Yeah. And then we went back to Australia, and I did calling after calling. And I was like, at one point, I think I had 6 callings, just myself. Right? Australia is kind of the Wild West of Mormonism, right? Like there's like 10 people who do literally everything. And I had like 5 or 6 callings, and the last one I got was like he's like, okay, I'm giving you this calling because your next one is going to be a member of the bishopric. Right. And I was like, oh my God, I'm doing it. It's like, it's happening, right? It's manifesting. And then I came to Utah, and funnily enough, my faith went to shit as soon as I got here. Cause like this place sucks ass if you want to be a member of the Church of Latter-day Saints. I look back at that time now and I say, okay, I kept saying yes to things. And in the back of my mind, I had this patriarchal blessing, my missionaries, my in-laws, everyone saying to me exactly what Steve said. You'd make a great bishop, right? And to me, it almost became a self-fulfilling prophecy to the point where the only reason it didn't get fulfilled is because my ex-wife's like need to come home and be with her family put us in a place where I went from 5 or 6 callings to being the head of a scout troop, right? And not needed at all in my ward. And amongst other things, it sort of derailed the whole progression, right? But I could very easily see, I've seen myself manifesting that future for myself because it's where I'd opened myself to it, and so I had been pouring energy into it. Mm-hmm. Now I parallel that to the person I love who got their patriarchal blessing a couple of weeks ago. Poor thing. She had a really rough time. She really struggled with it. And when she came out of it, she was like in tears of like how bad that felt for her, which is a whole thing. But I'm sitting there and I'm listening to this man ask questions of this girl and get nothing because she's socially awkward as hell, right? And asking her like, what do you like at school? And what are your favorite things to do? And how do you feel the spirit? And her giving him almost nothing. Mm-hmm. And then that patriarchal blessing being full of platitudes and zero guidance. Mm-hmm. The one thing he said was, you'll meet a nice man and have kids. We're not even sure if she's straight at this point. Like,
right.
Oh,
I hate that shit.
But you know what I mean? And
even in the baby blessings, I would hear people say that to their infant.
Yeah, to the infant.
Someday you will get married in the temple and have children. And I'm like, you don't know that?
You are making 5 billion assumptions. But if your fundamental assumption is that after death, you still have the chance to do those things, it's a pretty safe thing to say.
The catch-all,
right? It is. It is the catch-all, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, so looking at it from the outsider's perspective, I was there as emotional support, and I watched it, and I went, "This is how psychics work." The questions they ask beforehand, they get to know you pleasantries that you don't really realize is them fishing for micro bits of information that they can then spin. And I'm like, this man, it's not his intention to be manipulative. Mm-hmm. He was trained to do this a certain way, right? And so I look at all of these things, and this is one very narrow thing, this patriarchal blessing, but I've seen it in like palm readings or even in astrology or even in other like just coaching. I've seen this thing. And so I wonder exactly what Soch was wondering. When that's given to you, do you then, even subconsciously, channel more energy and create a self-fulfilling prophecy? Would you have been
absolutely.
a spiritual healer?
You know, the funny thing is I'd already had dreams that I was doing just this, what we're doing right now.
Right. And so
I was teaching on things. So that was before I got that, right?
Yeah.
So, I was kind of leaning that direction. So here's the thing. I don't give a shit whether it's prediction or whatever. It was affirming in the moment.
Yeah.
The path and a process that I was already in was read. And, I had not talked to this woman, by the way. This is not a person I knew. They didn't know my life. They didn't know my propensities. Okay. They just said, this is in your chart. And, I've had that experience a number of times. Well, then here's the thing what we do, Keith. I think we all read patterns. Mm-hmm. We are all constantly predicting the future. One of the ways that it's the idea of what the brain works is that we're making zillions of predictions all the time. The brain is a prediction machine. And then it uses the senses to confirm the patterns of already knows. That's why people can know, for instance, like if you watch certain soccer players, soccer's a really good one for this. They have like a preternatural ability to know what's going to happen next. They can feel the people around them. Like a good goalie, right? Seems to have a sense. Like he almost moves, and you can see
before
it.
the person.
I've
kicks
seen
even,
film where you can like 70% of the time, a certain goalies move the right way before the ball is kicked. Because, and there's this prediction pattern where they take cards, right? And they're reading cards, and it turns out the brain knows what the next card is going to be turned over. The brain knows that 3 or 4 seconds before the card is turned. But the person doesn't know that they know.
Well, it's even like there's so many things, right? There's the known discrepancy between input and processing of like literally we are living in the past right now. I've already said this thing.
Right.
And you're just taking a long time to hear it and process it, right?
Right.
And then there's even things like I was reading a book, The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, right? Great series, fantasy series. And in there, they're learning about magic and they're learning about patterns and stuff. And it's a fantasy book. I tie it all back to this always. But he says to them, okay, I'm going to throw this ball underhand, right? And he gives them, I'm going to throw it at this force, at this speed, right, in this direction. Predict where it's going to land and put your hand there, right? I'm going to give you all lesson to do it. And so they spend an hour and a half trying to do all the calculations of the weight of the ball and the arc of the throw and all that, and they can't. They're brilliant magicians, and they're like, I cannot figure this out. And then the professor calls a slave boy in from outside, and he's like, come here. And he throws the ball to the boy, and in seconds, the boy's hand is exactly where it needs to be to catch the ball. Right? Before the ball has come anywhere near the boy, he's ready, and he catches it. And it's like, how come none of you in this room could think this problem into a solution, but this boy could intuit the answer immediately? Is he smarter than this room full of academics, right? And he talks about it as the subconscious, or the unconscious mind, one of those. That it is working at speeds and at levels that we in our conscious mind cannot fathom. Yeah. And constantly picking up on little tiny cues is exactly what you're talking about.
So just expand that to the universe wide.
Right.
And all the signals that we're getting. Sue Morter likes to say that we can process, the body can process 11 billion bits of information. But the conscious mind can process 200K in a second, right? So we're
That's
taking
still pretty good, but yeah,
like we're really great processors, but the body, the whole system is processing an amazing amount of energy information.
Wow, yeah,
and those things are so subtle that we can't even imagine. So expand that all, and you can predict. By the way, the two people that can predict things are sociopaths and psychics. And those are two sides of the prediction. Sociopaths can predict things because they don't care.
Right. They can separate
They
themselves,
have no conscience.
Yeah.
When you have no conscience, it actually gives you a superpower. So what psychics do is try to act like sociopaths. They try to get themselves out of it enough so they can see. It's really hard to get yourself out of the way to see the patterns. But the patterns are there, right? If you can get yourself out of the way enough and get into a state that you are seeing it, time is an illusion. We know this, laws of physics, time is an illusion. Space is an illusion. We're all in one big kerfuffle at the same time. So why these things don't affect, why people don't think like things like planets and so forth and et cetera affect them, I don't know, because they definitely do.
Hubris. I don't want to feel like a thing I can't see controls me. Right? Like it really is like, it's that protective sense of the self. Like the idea that some planet moving a certain direction might have any effect on my emotions is so terrifying for someone who is control oriented, right?
Yeah.
I get that.
Yeah. One of the things that I experience, as a mostly non-trained somatic healer is somebody will tell me where they hurt. And then I'll go to work on their body and my hands will be directed to an entirely different part of their body. And this is, I haven't studied anatomy and muscles, aside from a little bit for midwifery. It's just like, I know that whatever that thing is in their upper shoulder blade, their lower back glute is calling me.
Mm-hmm.
And I push on that, and it's almost a little bit annoying to them. They're like, how did you know?
Yeah.
You know, and
It also feels like witchcraft. It's like, what do you mean you just pressed a button on my ass and now my shoulders feel
know.
good? Like, what the hell just happened?
I don't know. And it's almost, in some ways, it's almost better that I haven't studied the way that all of those things interrelate, because that makes more available to me. So I cannot know the name or the shape of the muscle or how it's connected to your shoulder blade, but I can feel that your body wants the touch there, you know?
Yeah. And there's strength in both things, because, like, you know, there's obviously strength in knowing those things, but there's also strength in not knowing and discovering and not being bound to a preconceived set of ideas.
Right.
Like, I link this to tech, which is just going to go totally out of nowhere, right? I've had professionally trained theater tech people come into the gym at the school that I used to teach at and be like, how in the hell do you make anything sound good in here? And my response is always, I'm not bound by your rules. I had to figure it out.
Exactly.
And so they've got someone right now who is tech trained, and she is really struggling because everything she's been taught to do to fix the sound problems don't work when you're in this like random Bermuda Triangle of audio frequencies, right? And the same thing with the body. If I have a sprained ankle and you massage my calf and make my ankle feel better, I mean, technically, you're more than likely my ankle's been compensating for a bad pain somewhere else, and you're alleviating that pain. But because you don't know, you're not bound to my ankle.
Right. Exactly.
So you know, I want to bring this back to a little bit about the patterns themselves. So, you know, the zodiac, and to some degree that's related to the pantheons, and to some degree that's related to the tarot or the Kabbalah. And you have this whole interesting thing that happened over time, is that you had people observing patterns. And then those patterns became archetypes that people communicated with each other, right? And so it's a lot like what we were just talking about, where one thing relates to the other. And if, for instance, if things aren't going well in my life, if I make a sacrifice to this deity, basically pay attention to something that I'm not paying attention to.
Exactly, yeah.
And give energy there, then I'll feel psychologically better, or things will flow. And this is true. And it looks like magic to people who, or sounds like woo, if you're not paying attention. But like in Aeon, Jung is like, why am I talking about Jesus? Because Jesus is obviously there, at least psychologically. And because he's there psychologically, I'm more likely to believe in the actual Jesus, that there was like this guy named Jesus, and that, you know, there was something that happened there. Because you can follow the patterns backwards and forwards. You know, you can follow history down, you can follow your life path down, but also, you know, you can follow it forward into the future. What's going to happen? And you're a result of the things that have happened in the future. You know, when it comes to energy, there is no linearity. Linearity doesn't exist, but to our existence, it does exist. So, you know, following the patterns forward and backwards, looking at things that are and that are just kind of in there, you get to places like worship that look like I'm begging the gods to help me do a thing so that a certain thing will happen, or etc. But really what I'm doing is trying to come to grips with the thing that's happening in my life. And I'm trying to connect myself with the energies of that, right? So that it puts archetype and you know, the way that people work with gods, the way they work with the zodiac, the way they work with like tarot cards, etc., in a totally different thing. You know, I read tarot for people, and I love it. I love tarot because I can go through the card and I'll get a hit of energy when their card shows up, and I'll read. They'll ask me a question, and I'll read it. And these are archetypal energies, right? Processes that are related to the Kabbalah and the Tree of Life, the way that energy happens. You know, it's just a rational process. And I can pick the right cards because they're in a process and they have an energy process. And if I read into that, then that happens. Now, that's a reality for me. It's not perfect, but it does give us a hit. And I've done so many now that are so ridiculously like spot on. Or I'll pick a card from an oracle deck that's like so spot on to my process that its synchronicity is like uncanny.
This needs to be an episode. As you're talking, I'm picturing a camera pointed down at my desk where there's tarot cards.
Yeah.
And then a camera pointed at each of us, and we're doing a reading.
Let's
and I feel
do
like
it.
this
That
needs
sounds
to be an
amazing.
episode.
We should do a tarot read. That sounds like a fun, like almost like bonus episode for this.
Yeah, I like it a lot.
Because we can play with the tarot in a way that, you know, those images and that the way that those energies have been thought out. This is a careful observation over thousands of years, right? This is not somebody coming up with some bullshit thing, you know. And most pantheons are like that. They are carefully developed systems of psychology that people have observed over time, and to some degree, they're limited to the time and space. So, you know, I can look at the Greek gods, and if you want to read a great book, "Care of the Soul" by Thomas More. And he goes through each of the archetypes, and many of the chapters are about particular like how psychologically valid each of the, you know, many of the different Greek pantheon gods, Greek Roman pantheon gods are. And you could go through any pantheon and do this thing, you know. And you know, here is an interesting pattern of energy that happened that became an archetype, that became some kind of practice or worship, you know. This was not an accident.
Right. I mean,
it's not like some stupid superstition. It's a valid psychological process that then sometimes becomes a stupid superstition because then people lose track of why they're doing this. And it becomes the archetypes start playing them instead of us paying attention to the archetypes.
Yeah, I mean, we look at this, even you can look at it scientifically too, and you can say, I mean, most epistological myths are trying to explain things that we don't have the ability to understand yet, right? So, like the myths of the Greek gods, and like even you know, the idea of humans, and the idea that we were like once like male and female were once one person and then split because Zeus was afraid of us, stuff, right? Like that's trying to explain the pool that we have to find a mate, right? So if you look at that and you go, okay, when I do an offering to Poseidon, my ship does better on the ocean. It's like, yeah, if you put your energy and focus into doing better on the ocean, and you know, you do that symbolically with a sacrifice, but really what's happening is you're putting your energy and focus into that thing. You're going to build a better ship, right? And so then it's interesting to be like, yeah, I mean, the reason for this may have been off. There may not have been a set of gods acting like children on the top of a very climbable mountain, Greeks. Go check, like, but whatever, you know, there may not have been those things, but those were explanations of real questions and explanations that worked despite the fact that maybe the premise was flawed, right? Or maybe it wasn't, I don't know. But you can look at that and go, the Greeks become the Roman gods. And this is to your point of time and space, where pantheons kind of live well in their time and space. And you can see, okay, what happened from Greek to Rome historically, you know, evolutionarily, this wartime shift, the expansion of empires, and all of our gods, all of our archetypes, then shift focus to be Roman, right? And then what was happening in the north with the Norse gods, and they're all survival and pillage and plunder and spreading life in harsh climates. Like they make sense for their time and space, but they're just like the classic texts. They make sense. They make sense for the human experience.
Yeah.
Right? They define or they explain something that is real.
Yeah. And, you know, you read some of those gods and those stories and they don't make sense, but they make sense on a level of, I guess you could say energy. You know, like that doesn't have practical aspect for my life. There were practical aspects to the gods. For instance, you know, the Odyssey is full of practical ways to feed an army or, make dinner, it has all these step-by-step instructions on how to do it. It was like a conveyor of some actually practical information. But the more and more it is like, the way that I see it is if I make a prayer and offering to a deity, I am always referencing this.
The self.
So I make myself, but it is a way for me to connect to larger energies in kind of a container, right? Like there's a safety or a process.
It's guided.
I know a few people who really, really keep the pagan holidays, and they're very priestessy about those things, and I love that. Sometimes I think, to a degree, that's like becomes, I don't know, devotional. It's really interesting, but that is an orientation I think that's very helpful for a human being. There's a certain amount of sanity in connecting to nature or connecting to energy in those containers with those processes. Mm-hmm. It's useful.
To me, it feels
ultimately it's useful.
Yeah, it feels like going like it's the rare system that can reach through the conduit that makes it an open system, right? So it would be, we do this actually. I was going to say it would be like this, but we do this, right? So it would be like us worshiping the sun, right? The sun is literally a channel of energy that connects the Earth system to the solar system, right? And even the individual to the sun, but also like the planet. Like we receive UV rays from the sun. We receive energy. We also send stuff out into the universe. So it's cool that we can choose as human beings. I feel like we're one of the only beings, I guess, conduits of consciousness that can look up the channel that feeds it, right? Like we can look up the energy and go, okay, let's connect to nature, a thing outside of our system, and let's choose to look into that system and further and further again. And it's useful information. Like it's all useful information. So even if you get stuck in the woo-woo of astrology, you can still look at it and go, as a philosophical tool, how does this serve me? It's still looking outside of myself for information. And I bring it back and I check and I say, okay, like I'm the cell membrane. I bring it back and I check and say, does this serve me or does this hurt me? And I can accept or reject what I want. But if I reject because that's my tendency, is I'm skeptical and I reject out of skeptical. But I'm also practical and I can't dismiss the movements of the moon.
Yeah.
But I can be like, well, that chick who was obsessed with astrology had her own issues. And I didn't end up with her, right?
Right, and you can't. Here's the thing: is you can't always close your cell membrane to the energies.
Right, it's true.
Just like if your village floods,
yep,
you can say I don't believe in floods, and your house is still going to get swept away.
Yeah,
it's that if I understand and have a relationship with this energy. Now I'm in a position to be in relationship to it, to be in a place of responsiveness so that the best possible outcome is available instead of just getting swept away by it. My patriarchal blessing experience was also kind of disappointing.
Yeah.
I think because at the time, what I really was aching for was a sense that God knew me as an individual. And my patriarchal blessing was so similar to everybody else's.
Yeah.
And then I had the experience of sitting with a couple of my kids and theirs, and my two oldest sons got theirs on the same day. And I sat and listened to these blessings, and they were actually really beautiful. Like there was a channel there. Like this guy was finding something in these kids, right? I don't fully dismiss or accept patriarchal blessings any more than astrology. I think there's something there that's happening, right? That's possible. But he does these two blessings that were very different and unique. And then when we got the printed version, they were both almost identical.
Wow.
So the church actually has the patriarchs like go through and filter out anything that's too specific or mystical.
That makes sense because then easy to disprove.
Yeah. And so then,
Yikes.
when I went to my first astrology reading, I cried and cried and cried as thing after thing was like spoken to and revealed. And it was like, oh, there is something here. And how I kind of imagine it with astrology is like your soul's coming down to this planet, and it's coming through a certain portal that certain energies are, they each have a can of spray paint, if you will. And you're getting sprayed by every single one of those as you come in. And if you know what those are, then you can work with them.
Yeah.
And that there are certain things that are going to harmonize with your system and other things that aren't so much. Mm-hmm. And understanding that can become this really beautiful dance of like finding your unique expression while working with all of these archetypes versus, oh, I got sprayed real hard with the Aries can, so now I have to be a bitch for the rest of my life. Yeah,
it's interesting. I can be like, I know what colors I was painted with, but I don't know what my canvas looks like. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know which direction I was facing when I was coming down. You know what I mean? Or how long that color hit me for.
Yeah.
But if I can be like, okay, these energies are part of what made up my path. And this is, again, like I always try and come back to like the open interpretation. Then at the very least, I know what energies I'm working with and what energies I resonate with, because they're the ones that like, and then I can be like, okay, actually I need a bit of Aries red right now because I don't really have a lot of that in my life, and I'll pull that in. Yeah. Or I'm a little bit oversaturated with the healer nonsense of the Aquarius blue, and I need to ditch that shit because like that leads me to my Mata archetype, right? A lot. And so like I can see, I live by the saying that like all information is helpful, right? Even if it sucks and it hurts. All information is useful. All data is helpful. And so I can be like, okay, I know my colors. I know the energies that hit me, and I can work with that a little bit. I could see that.
I think, kind of the kind of end statement here, or, maybe to leave is just that there are so many systems and beautiful seeings and ways to look at the human experience, and some of those are very empirical and it's very useful to look at science and what it has to say about our body, about psychology, all those things that are very useful. There's this other side that's more open-ended, but it's not less pattern-oriented. It just has a different set of assumptions, and in a way, it's kind of, we could say it's future-oriented, or it's you're starting from larger and coming to smaller. There's like that feeling of you're part of something.
Yeah.
A cell becomes cancerous when it stops knowing where it is. And it stops knowing where it is because it stops being able to interpret the signals of the cells and the energies around it, right? And this is really an interesting thing, when you can provide a cell with wholeness, you put a cancer cell in a place where it has the right signals, it will re-signal itself into wholeness. One of the things that happens in this world is that we've lost religion. Empirical science is reductive and not expansive.
Yeah.
And for the most part. And so we've lost signal, many people and many communities, so that we don't really know what to do. Like the humans don't know how to connect and how to be. So, for instance, we've lost signal with the earth, and we've become ecologically self-destructive as a race. We've become psychologically destructive in that we don't signal to a community. We feel isolated, we feel depressed, we feel anxious because we're not connected in the way that human beings connect the best. Like, you can see a lot of ways we've lost our signal.
Yeah.
So one of the things I think that archetype does for us is it re-signals us. We can, I think that we're more important. Your experience with your own self is way more important than anything, but to create some curiosity, to open up to possibilities, that there's signal out there, that those archetypes, those patterns, those pieces can connect you to something, possibly, to be curious about it, to be open with it. And I think as a species, if we don't reorient in some way, because to me it's obviously not working, That's just my assessment.
I mean, we're on the other side of the pendulum. We went all communal, and now we're all individual, and hopefully we're going to find some balance.
Well,
there.
it is this me-we cycle, right? But to me, it's more like, no, I think we're cancerous. We're self-destructive. We're eating ourselves alive. We're creating more disharmony every day. So there's a reorientation that has to happen, and the system will right itself.
Yeah.
One of the ways that I think archetypes are coming in is a huge meme. I hear it everywhere now, right? And I think one of the things is because we're trying to get away from religion, which was, I think, cancer part of the problem, right?
Right. I mean, religion has control.
Yes, and it's actually distorted our signal.
Yeah.
Whereas at one point it was harmonious and good for us, but something's different now. It's not creating that signal of harmony, and now we need something else. And I think archetype is a level that we can do the connection without abandoning ourselves, to some kind of system of control. I think I have a lot of hope in it. I'm interested in it. I'm curious.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us today. We appreciate you as an audience, and just really enjoy these conversations, and would love to have you participate in any way that feels good to you. So please like, share, and subscribe. Visit our website at www.soulandspiritwellness.com and send us a question that you would like to have a conversation about, or sign up to come be on our podcast. We love to have visitors.